Mr. Speaker, I had the opportunity to recently rise in this chamber and ask the Secretary of State for Combating Crime about the rampant crime on the streets in my community and across this country. At the time, Vaughan had seen 7 shootings in just 3 weeks. Since I asked my question, there have been 3 more shootings. One of them as recent as yesterday in the early morning hours in the area of Thornhill Woods. Just another day in Vaughan where gunshots rang out while families are asleep in their beds. We know that so much of the criminality that is rampant on our street is a direct consequence of weak, liberal, soft-on-crime laws, catch-and-release policies that keep repeat violent offenders out of jail and on our streets. People are afraid. They're scared and they're frustrated. They're frustrated because of the lack of action by this Liberal government. And it's not just Conservatives who have been raising the alarm for years about Liberals' failed bail laws. It's the everyday person at the local bakery in my riding, the mother and father shopping at the grocery store. Even the mayor of Vaughan said about yesterday's shooting, and I quote, "These instances are a direct result of broken criminal justice system that catches and releases repeat violent offenders instead of keeping them behind bars. We need stronger and tougher laws and real bail reform from the federal government immediately." End quote. Everyone, and I mean everyone, wants the Liberal government to act. Police chiefs, police associations, provincial governments, victim groups, municipal governments, all of them are begging for action. And what do we keep hearing from this government? Don't worry, bail reform is coming. When? We have yet to hear a date for this bill. There is also 0 details about what is actually in the bill. Will the government get rid of the principle of restraint from Bill C-75, which compels judges to release offenders under the least onerous conditions at the earliest opportunity? Will they finally admit that their ideological approach to criminal justice is flawed, that it prioritizes violent criminals over victims? If this truly was a priority for this government, they would have introduced bail reform in the spring, or at the very least, right at the start of the fall session. But they didn't. And we've seen their priorities. We've seen them prioritize banning people from buying cars from one another for $10,000 in cash or more, prioritize lowering the threshold for what constitutes hate speech, and prioritize confiscating firearms from law-abiding citizens, all in the name of combating gun crime, despite the fact that police tell us 90% of gun crime is committed from illegal guns coming over the border with the United States. Everyone seems to know what the problem is. Everyone except this Liberal government. That's why we introduced our Jail Not Bail Act, so we can end the principle of restraint, create a new category for major offenses, and bring in the bail reform this country so desperately needs. So given how important this fix is, how quickly we need to fix this mess, yesterday we tried to pass a motion to fast-track our Jail Not Bail Act, send it to committee. We committed to working extended hours. We do whatever it takes. Unfortunately, the Liberals voted against our motion, once again prioritizing criminals over victims. Just last week, we heard from the Prime Minister that they want to get tough on crime. Well, if that's the case, why are they standing in the way? Mr. Speaker, my question is this. Why does the government pretend to be tough on crime while standing in the way of our plan to prioritize victims over criminals and keep repeat offenders behind bars?
Next Secretary to Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, in dealing with the issue of crime and safety in our communities, we have a new Prime Minister that has made a solemn commitment to Canadians. Along with the Prime Minister, we had 340 plus candidates canvassing the entire country, dealing with what are important issues to Canadians. And the issue of crime and safety was a priority. That is the reason why the Prime Minister of Canada made that solemn commitment in the last election to bring forward bail reform legislation. Now, you listen to what the member is saying, and he's of the impression that we should have brought forward the legislation the moment after the election. There is an obligation on the Prime Minister and his government to work with the different stakeholders that are out there to build the consensus in terms of how and what form that bail legislation should be presented. That's the way it was done previously, and that's the way it needs to be done, because the justice, our judicial system, is a shared responsibility. Ottawa has a role to play, the provinces have a role to play, municipalities have a role to play. And working with the other stakeholders along with those the provinces and the municipalities in our territories and Indigenous communities is critically important before we can actually present the legislation. The Conservative Party knows full well that that legislation is coming this fall. Yes, there is no hard, fast date, because the commitment from the Prime Minister was to give that legislation and present that legislation this fall. And that means, Mr. Speaker, and we have to wait for the legislation to get here. And once it's here, hopefully we'll get the same enthusiasm that the Conservatives like to portray to Canadians on the issue. And we'll get that enthusiasm in the form that they'll want to see the legislation actually pass. Because when we have provided legislation such as Bill C-2, which makes communities safer in Canada, the Conservative response has been to filibuster, Mr. Speaker. We're still debating Bill C-2, and it was introduced weeks ago. And now we have the Conservatives jumping up saying they want the bail reform legislation, and the government and the Prime Minister is doing the background work to ensure that we have bail reform that is widely accepted and a consensus based on the feedback that we're getting from provinces, municipalities, and other stakeholders. Why? Because it is a shared responsibility. We will bring in the legislation to change the criminal code to ensure that we have the bail reform that is going to make our communities safer. This is something in which the Prime Minister, our newly elected Prime Minister, made in terms of a commitment, and I can assure the member that we will deliver on that commitment, and hopefully he and his caucus will get behind it and allow...
The honourable member for Vaughan Woodbridge.
Mr. Speaker, I was on the member's website, and it reminded me of a simpler time in this country, one that made sense, one where criminals were kept behind bars, where repeat offenders were kept in prison. Now, we hear from the member nothing but excuses for the delays. Crime is not a new problem in this country. The rise in crime has been going on for years at this point, and we've heard, like I said in my remarks earlier, from police associations. We've heard from police chiefs. We've heard from municipal and provincial governments. We've heard from every stakeholder. The only stakeholder that's been committed to delays is the federal government. The only stakeholder that doesn't want to move and get this done so citizens can feel safe and secure in their own homes and their own communities seems to be this government. So enough with the delays, enough with the obstruction. If they don't want to introduce the legislation, get out of the way and we'll do it for them.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Speaker, the reality of the issue is that the Liberal Party, in particular this Prime Minister, sees the issue of crime and safety in our communities as an issue that we need to reflect the interests of Canadians. And we're putting Canadians first. That is our motivation. And we will bring forward that bail reform legislation. Unfortunately, it would appear, and I can clearly demonstrate it if the members would give me leave to be able to provide more detail, the Conservative Party of Canada is motivated for political partisan reasons One of them is to generate funds. Another one is to be able to portray this false impression that the government of Canada, in particular this Prime Minister, is not doing anything, which nothing could be further from the truth. We will continue to pursue and present that legislation.